Fighting games are cool, but you know when they're cooler? When they feel a little weird. Turn of the millennium fighting games all have this sort of strange mood going on, where time and technology took this massive leap that permeated through the moods of the media we consumed. Fighting games in particular didn't just have to be cool anymore, they could sometimes get a little weird.
Oh, that was pretty sick. The guy's growing wings. Oh, it's weird. That's so weird.
Atmospheric, creepy, or ride high with a sleeker, modern design. Tekken Tag Tournament is a game that's stuck between two eras though, with one half of it literally just being an upgraded and fundamentally altered Tekken 3, and the other half utilizing the PS2 hardware to give the roster a complete makeover. All of these characters now have much more well-defined designs that really let you see tons of little details shine through. Tonally, Tekken Tag Tournament is this strange mix of moods and feelings though, which is due in large part to it being the bridge between two different gaming generations, but also because of how distinctly experimental the game is, not just in terms of the gameplay, but also in terms of its aesthetics. The first three games are all really distinct too, but Tekken 3 in particular played it pretty straight with its 90s rock punk street fight aesthetic. It tried to be cool and succeeded, which aesthetically is a pretty far cry from what the first two Tekken games ended up being. Tekken 1 is a simplistic game in lots of ways to be sure, but its mood is unlike anything I really know. The stages are simple, lifelike locations that don't really ooze any sense of particular being. They're just a desert, a field, a baseball stadium, accompanied by tracks that can go pretty hard, but also just kind of be atmospheric for a little bit. It's not right to say that these stages are bland, because they're anything but. They simply lack focal points that connect them to characters of the roster, since they're just supposed to be lifelike locations. With that said, the Chicago stage hints at where the vibe of the games would eventually go, to places that invoke darker vibes, or more clearly linking with characters on the roster. Stages that have a lot of texture to make them stand out. Tekken 2 is an evolution of this feeling, but lending itself way more to a dreamy, poppy sort of vibe.
Final round. Fight!
With a soundtrack and stages that create more distinct feelings, like the forest stage that frankly looks terrifying with these gigantic trees in the background. But there's also something soft and comforting about this place too. Or the roof of the skyscraper that lets you look out to the city below as you tangle in the skies above. We've also got stages that play with lighting to really sell a certain vibe, whether it's to make some arenas more intimidating or atmospheric in some way. Tekken 1 and 2 ultimately play with scale and contrast that with the fighting, which is then completely thrown for a loop in Tekken 2 in the final stage with Kazuya.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Where the background disappears for you to lock in for the fight of your life. These stages have a really good sense of place, and I think the music choices for Tekken 2 really help them out. Tracks that both fit in perfectly with their respective stage or contrasted in really neat ways, with Kazuya's final boss track being so moody and atmospheric. I also want to mention the alternate track that plays if you use the arranged version of the music, which plays a much sadder sounding tune in this fight. Makes the battle feel a lot more tragic, as if Kazuya isn't really in control of what happens anymore, as opposed to Emotionless Passion, which is a song that sounds darkly determined. When a fighting game reminds me more of the Zone of the Ender's main menu than, a fighting game, then there's something special happening. Tekken 3 moved away from the style though by being more easily describable, I would say. It's still distinct with that 90s punk rock vibe with a lot of grungy stages, the inclusion of Jin Kazama, who simply is one of the coolest characters in fighting game history, and a generally more well-rounded vibe. Stages in particular feel less like places that just exist and more like real tangible places within the Tekken universe. There's also the opening, which is just chaotic as hell. We got Lei Wulong running away from a helicopter launching rockets at him for some reason, Eddie Gordo escaping prison, Nina in anti-aging goop, there's a lot going on here. But there's something distinctly different between Tekken 2 and 3. There's a missing sense of that melancholic mood that sweeps through every facet of the game. So what happens when we mix a little bit of Tekken 1 and 2 with a little bit of Tekken 3? The opening is the first hint that we've got something a little different going on. Tekken 3's intro had a pretty big emphasis on combat, conflict, action, whereas Tekken Tag's intro is a little more chill. Sure, we have a police chase gone wrong and Brian doing his thing, but then we cut to Nina doing her makeup, Jun and Jin just kinda hanging out, and finally Kazuya getting a little angry and turning into a devil. Really, this opening feels like an homage to Tekken 2's opening, which had a very similar vibe and even the same sort of ending stinger, but I'd argue that Tekken Tag's intro has a slightly chiller vibe, especially because the music is just so goddamn nice to listen to. I just love how normal everything looks in these shots. I don't really know how else to explain it. It's sort of contemplative with a bunch of close-ups on characters' faces that they're not really emoting much. Really, everyone here is just going about their day without much awareness that they're in a fighting game. Tekken Tag really is a celebration of sorts for the series at this point, a way for all of the roster members to get together in one game to duke it out in a very non-canon way, which frees it from the shackles of a linear storyline and lets some of our roster members chill out a little bit. So this game should feel a little relaxing to hop into. Personally though, I've always found Tekken Tag Tournament to be a little creepy in some ways, with design decisions that make me feel, I don't know, a little nervous. There's something a little off with the game's presentation, that mixture of old and new design intents that makes stages feel like an unending void. Some character portraits feel a little creepy, and the silent way that some of the darker endings play out, I don't know, it just kind of gives off a strange vibe sometimes. But at the same time, Tag feels incredibly cool too. I didn't realize it at the time when I was a kid, but this game really was an important milestone to show how far Tekken had come as a series, and how full and unique its roster was, with characters that sure had very similar movesets at times, but also plenty of subtle differences to make their individual personalities stand out. And being able to pair up Jin Kazama with Kazuya Mishima was such a cool thing to do, even if they don't get along very often. A lot of Tekken Tag's aesthetic is frankly carried by the music, with a fascinating mix of late 90s to early 2000s techno and even trance-inspired music.
Round one, fight.
Jesus Christ, I'm getting my ass kicked in these clips. I didn't even realize until I started editing this. Perfectly bridging the gap between Tekken 1 and 2's more atmospheric OSTs, alongside Tekken 3's grungier stuff and the future of the franchise that would lean more on heavier, hype electronic sounds. I mean this when I say that Tekken has never really managed to capture this sort of vibe ever again, which isn't a bad thing, but more so a point for how unique Tekken Tag's sound is. Some tracks invoke excitement, while others are a little more foreboding. Some are mysterious, while some are simply pure hype. But all of them have the same sort of experimental personality, which really slots into the Tekken Tag Tournament so brilliantly. If there was anywhere for Tekken to do some weird stuff, it was naturally going to be here in this way. Or, you know, Tekken 4. The music is accompanied by a whole game too, so that's a really nice bonus. Anyway, back to the stages, which ooze so much atmosphere and personality on their own, and give off this odd feeling to me. Gen A is a stage that looks simple at first, but reveals this beautiful moonlit forest scene in the back that shines off the flooring in such a soft, naturalistic way, with the shadows of the fighters cast sharply against the pale flooring. Eddie's stage is similar to his own from Tekken 3, but with a lot more detail this time around. And in its second variation, we have this incredible sunset to fight against, which is really the most stereotypical PS2 setting for a fighting game stage, isn't it? Tropical beaches or towns at sunset feel like the first thing you check off when making a PS2 game, and the idea does not disappoint here. Hey, it's engagement time everyone. Leave your favorite PS2 sunsets in the comments below. I actually would like to know though. Please do. Yoshimitsu stage is a personal favorite since I'm always weak for snow-covered forests. And this sort of serene setting almost feels like a precursor to Moonlit Wilderness in a way. Quiet, peaceful wilderness broken up by the fight that's about to take place. Tekken has always done a good job balancing stages where there's a really chill background to contrast the spinning torso kicks and ninjas stabbing themselves in the middle of a fight. And my god, the texture on some of these stages. Look at this floor. The worn stone and the light reflecting off of it. Ugh. Then there's Unknown Stage. Final stages in Tekken games usually do a good job at feeling final to me, either by being set in a pretty epic location or in a place that has some significance to the final boss narratively. But Unknown Stage is kinda unique because she isn't a character that exists outside of Tekken Tag, and we really don't know anything about her beyond the hints that she's actually Jun, which is outright confirmed in Tag 2, which I hate. Why was that confirmed? I like the mystery, I like that. The lighting here is also once again doing a ton of heavy lifting. The softer, warm tones of the candlelight in the background are completely offset from the blue fire emanating from Unknown's wolf spirit, which shines on the fighters and makes the fight feel more legible, but in an uncomfortable sort of way. Tekken Tag still uses the infinite moving floor too, like the first 3 games, and this gives stages a very uncanny feeling. It's not too noticeable on stages like Unknown's because it's easy to assume that the hall is just very big, but much smaller spaces like Jin's stage can look really weird sometimes, especially in the demos that play on the start screen with the camera angle being a little higher. That sort of perfectly encapsulates the subtle creepiness of Tekken Tag, where each stage is this unending arena with no escape in sight. There's nothing that really tethers you to the area physically besides the backdrop and the floor, which is exactly how the first 3 games operate too. But the jump in visual fidelity makes this feel so much more uncanny in such a cool way. But again, that's kind of where the uncanniness of Tekken Tag comes into play. We have these amazing looking character models, lighting, and environment design, coupled with design limitations that come from Tekken 3, which is really what gives Tekken Tag its unique feeling in the first place. In that sense, it's really an amazing example of how rapidly technology and fidelity improved from the PS1 to the PS2, as well as this little peek into what the PS2 would be capable of later on in its life cycle. But beyond all of this cool stuff, the one thing that really cements Tekken Tag's atmosphere is the melancholy it describes. This game takes place in a non-canon bubble where fighters are able to fight one another in ways that wouldn't be possible otherwise. And that gives us a chance to see rivalries put aside to form devastating tag teams, friends coming together to complement their movesets, and narratively a chance for generations to come together. The storyline of Tag is non-existent. There's no real reason for why this is all happening, and the game doesn't really seem to care either way, which is amazing. It all plays out like some kind of dream that Xiao Yu is having, where everyone is reunited and ready to have a good time. And character endings are supremely cheaply made in comparison to what we had before too, which is very fair considering how many characters we have, and honestly, I think they're even more effective because of it. I always think about Jack 2's ending, where he and Prototype Jack are just sitting there, watching the sunset together, simply enjoying each other's company, and maybe a little too nervous to acknowledge that that's even what's happening. 2 killing machines, just taking a second to sit down and have a good time. Or Jun's ending, where she is able to quell Jin's devil gene, and perhaps even remove it entirely before vanishing. Contrasted beautifully with Devil's ending, where he finds an unconscious Jun and flies away with her. It's like the only time in the series where we get to see Kazuya actually show some seemingly loving feelings toward someone else in the series. And the fact that he only does this in his most evil form is a really interesting little moment. It's really a sign of how strong Tekken's characterization is that these 20-second cutscenes of models just kind of doing things can be so effective at storytelling. I seriously get more out of this stuff than I do even from some of the CG scenes later in the series. Even a basic understanding of the characters gets you a big return here. But none of this actually happens in the series, and while these are incredible interactions, none of them truly happen as far as we know. And that's what makes Tekken Tag such an incredibly sad game to me. Some character resolutions can never take place. Simple endings like Taiga putting on a big show for everyone are stuck in this bubble, and I can't help but feel sad that so many of these moments are stuck right here. Tekken Tag is a celebration of the series. It's a complicated mix of nostalgia, heartfelt moments, and some of the best music in the Tekken franchise that gives this game the vibe that it has. And I think a large part of why I still come back to it is because it just feels like such a unique Tekken game. It's the bridge between what we knew and what we now know, and I think that's really neat.